Bernhard Stroh arrived in Detroit in 1850 with $150 and a wheelbarrow, and what he built became one of the most powerful family empires in American history. His descendants survived Prohibition, the Great Depression, and 2 world wars without losing a dollar. Then one man made a bet, and in just 11 years, $700 million was completely gone. This is the story of how one of America's greatest family empires was built, reached its peak, and quietly declined over a single generation. The glory before the fall. Every fallen empire has its older days of glory, and to understand how this family lost $700 million in 11 years, we have to go back in time to 1849, the year when one man from Germany traveled by boat to the West with an ambition that would change America forever. His name was Bernhard Stroh, and he left Germany that year with nothing but $150 and a sacred beer recipe. But along the way, something interesting happened. Before coming to America, he stopped in Brazil first and spent 3 years there before boarding another ship that headed north. That boat docked in Detroit, and when Bernhard walked off and looked around the city, he decided to stay. The reason for this decision was quite obvious. The people craved something he had, and he was determined to make a fortune from that. You see, Detroit in 1850 was full of German immigrants, and most of them were thirsty workers who needed the kind of beer they had grown up drinking back at home. It was a cold, light, and clean lager in bohemian style. Difficult to find here unless smuggled and expensive to get. Bernhard knew how to make it, as he had learned the recipe from his father, who learned it from the one before him. This sacred recipe was passed on through the Stroh family, as they had been brewing beer in the Rhineland-Pfalz region of Germany for generations. Every great company had to start from somewhere, so Bernhard Stroh set up his small brewery at 57 Catherine Street. This facility was less than standard, but decent enough for a start. To sell the beer, he would send his sons to load small kegs onto a wheelbarrow and push them through the streets of Detroit. They pulled this off by knocking on doors and selling directly to families. There was no official store or distributor, just a recipe, a makeshift brewery, and a city full of people who craved what he was making. It didn't take too long for the business to kick off, as by 1860, customers were asking to take the beer home in bottles. The demand was high everywhere, growing faster than the wheelbarrows could carry. So he saved up money and bought more land on Gratiot Avenue on Detroit's east side and expanded the brewery in 1865. That same year, he adopted a new brand symbol from Kiersberg Castle in his home region of Germany. It was a lion emblem, and he named the operation the Lion's Head Brewery. The lion emblem was put on every bottle, and next to it was the family signature that served as a mark showing it was made by the original family. Many great things lay in store for his business thanks to high demand. But Bernhard wouldn't be able to see his company reach its peak, as he passed away on June 24, 1882. He was 59 years old, and his son Bernhard Jr. took over. Changes began to show when this happened, and not everyone was comfortable with it. For one, he completely renamed the business. It became known as the B. Stroh Brewing Company. He felt his father wasn't ambitious enough, and under his leadership the beer started traveling further. Secondly, he further refined the production process with refrigerated rail cars and pasteurization, and now Bernhard Jr. was shipping Stroh's beer all the way to Florida and Massachusetts. Thankfully, these moves paid off, as in 1893, Stroh's Bohemian beer won a blue ribbon at the World's Fair in Chicago, a huge achievement for the company. By 1902, the official name changed again, this time to the Stroh Brewing Company, and it would stick to that name for nearly a century. But the real change came when Julius arrived. He took over the brewery in 1908, and before he started running things, he took a long trip through Europe and visited the most famous breweries on the continent. He was looking for something that would make Stroh's different from every other beer being made in America, as other breweries were slowly catching on to what made his family's brand special. Soon enough, he found the answers, and they were in the brewing process itself. Most American breweries at the time relied on steam to heat their copper kettles. Julius studied the chemistry behind this and made a bold decision for the company to switch to direct flame. Instead of relying on steam for heating, he put fire directly underneath the kettles, believing the higher temperatures would change the taste and chemistry of the beer in a good way. The heat caramelized the sugars in the grain, which gave the beer a deeper, richer malt flavor with a slightly toasted quality. No other brewery in America was doing this, and Stroh's became the only fire-brewed beer in the country. The company was untouchable at this point, but everything changed when the United States made alcohol illegal in 1920. This prohibition lasted 13 years, and it was an interesting period in U.S. history. For most American breweries back then, it was an official death sentence. Hundreds of them shut down permanently and never reopened. As for Julius Stroh, he did not shut down but took a very interesting approach. Instead of giving up, he simply gave the company a new name. It became known as the Stroh Products Company. He removed all references to alcohol, but kept the factory running. And as strange as it may sound today, he figured out how to make beer with the alcohol extracted, but with a close enough feel and taste. He made birch beer, ginger ale, club soda, and malt syrups. He also tested the waters by making ice cream and became so successful that the snack became enormously popular across Michigan. Families who had never thought about Stroh's beer knew Stroh's name from the ice cream counter. It was the money from those products that kept the brewery alive through those 13, and it was done without a single drop of legal alcohol. When America's restriction against alcohol was officially removed in 1933, most breweries had to spend months rebuilding their equipment and reformulating their products before they could sell a single bottle of real beer. Stroh's did not have that problem. Their near beer was actual beer that had been de-alcoholized, so the moment the official rules changed, all the company had to do was reverse the process and put full-strength beer back in the bottle. The company was now more prosperous than ever, and in 1950, after over 40 years of never-ending growth and innovation, it was time to pass on the torch. Later that year, Julius's nephew, John Stroh Sr., became the leader of the company in 1950. This decision paid off almost immediately, as what happened next under his watch was beyond extraordinary. In 1950, Stroh's was producing 500,000 barrels of beer per year. And by 1956, that number had jumped to almost 3 million barrels. In just 6 years, output grew more than 5 times over. He was remembered as a man who was loved by almost every employee, with a strong memory that acknowledged everyone by face and name. For this reason, employees loved him, and that loyalty showed up in the quality of their work. The beer stayed consistent, the customers stayed loyal, and by 1978, Stroh's was selling beer across 17 states and producing 6.4 million barrels per year. The Forbes 400 list of the richest people in America included the Stroh family. The company was still entirely owned by the clan with no outside investors or public stock. Just the Stroh Group, their Detroit brewery on Graciote Avenue, and a business that 5 generations of immigrants and their children had built from a single wheelbarrow and $150. John Sr. had become chairman in 1967 and handed day-to-day control to his nephew Peter. The company was profitable. After 130 years of innovation, the family was wealthy, and the brewery was the 8th largest in the United States. However, Peter Stroh, the new head of the company, looked at all of these achievements and decided it was not enough. As we'll see, this would mark the start of the end, leading to one bad decision that destroyed the entire business. The careless bet and the downfall. The company was at its most successful when Peter took over as CEO. And what Stroh needed to take the top spot in the United States was meeting the right people and making the right agreements and partnerships. The system that fueled the company's success had been developed for over a century and didn't need fixing as far as the numbers showed. But there was one thing about the industry that made Peter think otherwise. In 1970, 93 breweries were operating across the United States. By 1985, only 43 were still open. The big companies were buying the small ones or outspending them until they had nothing left. Anheuser-Busch spent $350 million on advertising in 1985 alone. That was 40% of everything every beer company in America spent on advertising that year combined. Miller was not far behind. Regional breweries that did not grow fast enough were disappearing one by one. Stroh's could not match the money needed to grow and expand like these companies were. And that was Peter's fear. So to solve this, he decided Stroh's was going to grow and expand like the others, buying smaller companies until his lead form could scale up as well. By February 1981, Peter Stroh got to work immediately. He bought the F&M Schaefer Brewing Company out of New York. Schaefer was struggling at the time, and buying the company brought 3 new brands and pushed Stroh's volume from 6.7 to over 40 million barrels each year. This moved them up the national rankings by 1 step. But Peter was not finished. He was going to reach number 1, and nothing would get in his way. Or so he thought. Early the following year, he went after Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company. It was once the most famous beer company in America but had destroyed its own reputation in the 1970s by cutting costs in ways that changed the taste of the product. Customers noticed and switched to other brands. Sales ever since had been falling for years. Schlitz fought the takeover in court, not wanting to sell, but Peter raised his offer from $16 per share to $17. The Justice Department approved the deal only after Stroh agreed to sell one of Schlitz's breweries. By April 1982, the deal was done, but the cost was too high. Though Stroh's book value was barely $100 million, he borrowed 5 times the company's total worth to buy the damaged brand for $500 million. As a result, Stroh became the 3rd largest brewery in America overnight, but at huge cost. $500 million in debt, a debt that changed everything, especially at a time when the brewery industry was going through major changes. The 1980s were the decade when light beer took over America. Miller Lite was launched nationally in 1975, and by 2002, light beer would make up 44% of the entire U.S. beer market. To compete in that space, you needed advertising and lots of it. Anheuser-Busch had the money to pull this off, and so did Miller, while Stroh's was gathering all it could find to pay back the $500 million loan. Sometime after, they introduced a light beer, but in trying to make it stand out, the product completely missed the mark with customers. Peter insisted it be held at 115 calories rather than the 96 calories that Miller Lite and its competitors were running. For this and many other differences in taste and chemistry, the product never gained ground, leading to higher losses and debt for the company. While Budweiser and Miller blanketed television with campaigns that became part of American culture, Stroh's largely missed the most important shift in the beer industry in a generation. On top of that, advertising budgets were gutted by debt payments, and Peter turned to price, looking for ways of making many of his company's products more valuable than the competition. To do this, Peter Stroh introduced the 15-pack, now priced at what 12 cans normally cost. Then the 30-pack, now priced at what 24 cans normally cost. The strategy worked in the short term, leading to higher sales and finished stocks. However, they did nothing to build the brand. Every time someone bought a 30-pack of Stroh's, it was because it was the cheapest option on the shelf. Customers were tolerating the brand, not liking it. Margins shrank, and the brand drifted further down market. Wholesalers, on the other hand, were frustrated by the lack of advertising support and started switching to rival products. By 1985, Stroh's market share stood at 12%, and that same year, Peter announced that he would be closing the original Detroit brewery on Gratiot Avenue. Yes, the 135-year-old building where the founder Bernhard Stroh had started everything, where Julius had installed the copper kettles, where John Sr. had walked the floor and learned every worker's name. The building that employed 1,159 people was now getting shot down and revamped into something he believed would be profitable. Later, the land was redeveloped and renamed Brewery Park. By 1989, the company's market share had fallen to 10.5%, and for the first time in the company's history, the family could not pay dividends to its members. Peter hired Hal Riney, the advertising man behind Ronald Reagan's Morning in America campaign, to fix the brand. But what this man decided was even more bizarre. Riney's solution was to reposition Stroh's as a premium product. He removed the family's signature from the label. He replaced the classic design with modern block lettering. He eliminated the value-priced 15-pack and 30-pack formats and raised prices astronomically. Everything about the brand was upgraded into luxury. Everything except the beer inside the bottle. For this reason, many customers rejected it immediately and in large numbers. Market share collapsed to 7.6% by 1991. Industry analysts called it the steepest single sales decline in the history of American brewing. Yet it would be a whole year before Peter Stroh acknowledged there was a problem. Meanwhile, the old Milwaukee brand needed its own rescue. Focus groups in 1991 told the advertising team the brand felt like an outdated concept. So in response, the agency kicked off a new ad campaign. The videos were wild but brilliant for the time. 5 American actresses in platinum blonde wigs played Swedish women who came down on parachutes to meet countless men fishing, camping, and working at construction sites. The ad launched in summer 1991 and immediately broke through. People couldn't stop talking about it, and the ad served as the perfect launch pad for the women who starred in it. The 5 actresses appeared twice on the Fox sitcom titled Married with Children, and trusted ad polls later ranked it the second most popular beer campaign of all time. Sales for Old Milwaukee went up. On November 8, 1991, 5 female employees at Stroh's brewery in St. Paul, Minnesota filed a sexual harassment lawsuit. They claimed that the Swedish bikini team ads had created a hostile work environment. They also said that male workers used the campaign as cover for bad behavior and harassment that had been going on since the mid-80s. The National Organization for Women protested publicly, and the ad campaign was pulled down after just 7 months on air. Stroh had to settle the lawsuits out of court, and the terms were never disclosed. But things were only about to get much worse. The final crash. In August 1989, Peter had agreed to sell all of Stroh's operations to Coors for $425 million. It would have been a clean exit, granting them enough money to pay the debt and leave the family with something real. But Coors walked away after their accountants went through Stroh's books and found problems deeper than they had expected. The sale never happened. In 1991, Stroh sold its 31.6% stake in Spanish brewer Cruzcampo to Guinness for $335 million. That money was what settled the original Schlitz debt and gave the company breathing room. But that did not change the direction it was headed. Some pointed out Peter had not learned from his previous mistakes. As in 1996, he borrowed another $300 million and bought the G. Heilemann Brewing Company. This was a damaged company that had been in bankruptcy since 1991. And with 30 under-brands coming in as part of the overall package, Stroh now controlled more than half of the U.S. malt liquor market. None of Heilemann's brands was strong enough to anchor a national strategy. Most were regional labels that had been declining for years. During this same period, the company invested in biotechnology ventures and downtown Detroit real estate. Neither of these ventures was related to brewing, and neither of them worked. By the late 1990s, Coors had passed Stroh's as the 3rd largest brewer in America. John Stroh III took over as CEO in 1998, left to clean up the mess left behind by Peter. He took the reins at a very bad time. The company had also lost its contract to produce Samuel Adams beer for Boston Beer Company, eliminating a reliable revenue stream. The brands were declining, the debt was suffocating. The family that had outlasted Prohibition, the Great Depression, and 2 world wars had one option left. In February 1999, the Stroh family made the only decision they had left, and it was not the kind of decision anyone makes with pride. They sold the company, and not as one piece either. Miller Brewing Company took Henry Weinhard's and Mickey's, while Pabst Brewing Company took everything else, including Stroh's, Old Milwaukee, Schlitz, Schaefer, Old Style, Lone Star, and Rainier, among others. Brands that Bernhard Stroh's descendants had spent 149 years building were divided between 2 competitors in a single transaction, and the total sale price was $350 million. Of that $350 million, approximately $250 million went directly to creditors, and what remained after debt payments and employee pension liabilities, roughly $100 million, was placed into a fund for approximately 30 surviving Stroh family descendants. To understand what that means, consider that in 1988, the company had been worth $700 million, a figure that would equal approximately $9 billion today. And the family had appeared on the Forbes 400 list of richest Americans every year from 1984 to 1992. The $100 million they were splitting in 1999 represented less than 1.5% of what the family had been worth just 11 years before. By 2008, even that was completely gone. Francis Stroh, a fifth-generation family member, later wrote a memoir titled Beer Money, a Memoir of Privilege and Loss, describing what life inside the family looked like during those final years. Her father, Eric, a fourth-generation member who headed marketing, received $800,000 per year in dividends during the 90s and spent it freely on antiques, rare cameras, guitars, and collectibles at auction houses across the country. After his death, the family discovered many of those purchases were fakes or worth far less than what he had paid. What made it worse was that those dividend payments were no longer coming from company profits. They were being drawn from the principal of the family trust itself, meaning every check written to a Stroh family member during those years was draining the fund meant to protect them. Eric died alone in 2009, and Frances and her brothers each received $400,000, which was what remained. During those same years, two other family breweries were writing a very different story. Dick Ewingling took over his family's brewery in 1985, the same year Peter Stroh imploded the Detroit facility, kept the company debt-free, focused on regional dominance across just 22 states, and never chased the national market that consumed Strohs. Dick Ewingling is now a billionaire. The Coors family, who passed Stroh's as the third-largest brewer in America by 1990, invested in preparing their next generation with dedicated funds for business development and diversified into ceramics, a field where their manufacturing expertise transferred directly, generating $1.25 billion in annual sales by 1992. Their collective net worth today stands at an estimated $5.3 billion. The Stroh lion emblem still appears on bottles owned by Pabst. The family signature removed in the 1989 rebranding never came back. Where the original brewery stood on Gratiot Avenue, there is now a residential development called Brewery Park. Bernhard arrived in Detroit with $150 and a recipe, and built something that survived Prohibition, the Great Depression, and 2 world wars. And it took one generation to spend what 130 years had built. What do you think? Was Peter the main cause of the company's downfall? Or was it an issue that had slowly piled up before he took leadership? We look forward to the discussion below, and thanks for joining us. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.